Inside the Los Angeles County Courthouse, the air felt heavy, almost like it was hard to breathe. Rows of people watching filled the seats, whispering to each other as they watched what was happening. The table where the person accused sits looked too big for the young man standing next to it. Hands in his pockets, chin up just enough to show he wasn't scared. Jalen Dawson, 19 years old, blamed for stealing a car and not stopping when police told him to. The charges were bad, but the way Judge Walter Grayson looked at him made it clear the real test had nothing to do with following the rules. Grayson leaned back in his chair, fingers tapping slowly against the shiny wood of his desk. He looked down at Jalen from above his glasses, his lips turning into something between a mean smile and a frown. "You think you're some kind of law expert?" His voice sounded like he thought it was funny. "This isn't a debate club, kid." A few people laughed quietly in the courtroom. The guard, the person typing, even the lawyer trying to prove Jalen guilty. They were all joining in on the joke. Jalen didn't move. He wasn't laughing. He had spent years getting ready for this moment, not this exact one. He never planned on standing here as someone being blamed. But he knew the courtroom, like he knew his own hand. While other kids learned basketball facts by heart, he learned laws by heart. While his friends played video games, he practiced pretend trials in his mind, arguing made-up cases with himself. His mother, Denise Dawson, had worked as a legal helper for over 20 years, and Jalen had grown up listening to the stories she brought home. How lawyers took shortcuts, how judges picked favorites, how some defense lawyers barely tried. He took in everything. By the time he was 14, he could understand a trial better than most people studying to be lawyers, but none of that mattered to Grayson. To him, Jalen was just another kid in trouble. "Let's make this quick." The judge sighed, opening the case folder. "I have a golf game at 2. The audience laughed again, but this time something changed. Jalen's lips turned into a tiny, almost invisible smile because Grayson had just made his first mistake, but the courtroom hadn't seen it yet. The prosecutor, Mitchell Carrington, stood up from his seat, acting like a man who had already won. His suit was neat, his tie perfectly tied, and his voice had that practiced confidence of someone who had given the same speech 100 times before. "Your Honor, the state will prove without any doubt that the defendant, Jalen Dawson, was caught in the act in a stolen car, a 2022 Audi A6, reported missing just hours before he was arrested. Officers chased him through downtown, where he tried to run away. Before being caught, his fingerprints were found on the steering wheel. The prosecution says that the evidence speaks for itself." The words hit hard. The crowd watching shifted, whispering to each other on the surface. It sounded really bad. A stolen car, a chase. Running. Judge Grayson looked at Jalen from above his glasses, then turned back to Carrington. "Go on." The prosecutor walked toward the jury box, his shiny shoes clicking on the floor. "The defense may try to tell you that this was all a mistake, that Mr. Dawson is some unlucky victim." He turned, looking right at Jalen for the first time. "But let's be honest, what kind of victim runs from the police?" The tension in the room got thicker. Judge Grayson leaned forward, resting his chin on his hand. Jalen didn't blink. Carrington continued, flipping through a pile of papers. "Your Honor, I have here the statement from Officer Daniel Ruiz, who personally saw the defendant behind the wheel before he tried to run away. The car was confirmed stolen. The arrest was done the right way." Grayson breathed out through his nose. "Nodding sounds simple to me, and for most people in the room it probably did." The case seemed clear: a stolen car, a chase and arrest, but Jalen had spent too many years studying trials not to see the problems. Still, he stayed quiet, watching, waiting. Judge Grayson tapped his gavel lightly. "All right, let's hear what the defense says." He turned to Jalen's lawyer, a public defender named Lisa Thornton, who had barely said 3 words since walking into the courtroom. She stood up, moving nervously. "Your Honor, my client." Jalen placed a hand on her arm, a silent ask. She stopped, then sat back down. And for the first time, Jalen spoke. "I'll be representing myself, Your Honor." The room went completely silent. Grayson stared at him, clearly amused. "You'll what?" Jalen's voice was calm, steady. "I'll be defending myself." A whisper spread through the courtroom. The guard's eyebrows went up. Carrington's smile dropped for just a second before he let out a sharp laugh. This should be interesting, but no one was laughing when Jalen took his first step forward, because everything was about to change. The heaviness of the courtroom settled around Jalen as he adjusted how he stood, his hands still in his pockets. He let the silence stretch just a little, longer enough to make them uncomfortable. Then finally he spoke. "Your Honor, before I begin, I'd like to check something with the prosecution." Carrington raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "Go ahead." Jalen took a slow step forward. "You said Officer Daniel Ruiz personally saw me behind the wheel before I was arrested, correct?" Carrington breathed out sharply, already bored. "That's right. And that statement is written in his report." "Of course it is." Jalen nodded, then turned to Judge Grayson. "Your Honor, I move to throw out that statement as evidence." Grayson squinted at him. "On what reasons?" Jalen pulled his hands from his pockets for the first time. and pointed toward the prosecution's table. Because Officer Ruiz never saw me in that car, in fact. He wasn't even working when the chase started. A flicker of confusion crossed Carrington's face. What are you talking about? Jalen took another step forward, Your Honor. If the court lets me, I'd like to ask to check Officer Ruiz's GPS records from that night. If his report says he saw me in the car, then it should match where he was, but he let the word hang in the air. I have a feeling it won't. Now the whispers in the watching crowd grew louder. Grayson frowned, looking toward Carrington. Counselor. Carrington cleared his throat, his jaw tightening. That report was written by a police officer, Your Honor. Are we really going to believe a defendant over a trained professional? Jalen gave a small, almost casual shrug. If the officer was where he said he was, then the GPS information will prove it, but if he wasn't, he let the sentence trail off. Grayson studied him for a long moment, then turned to Carrington. Does the prosecution have any problem with checking the officer's GPS records? Carrington hesitated. The pause was just long enough. The jury noticed. The crowd noticed, and most importantly, the judge noticed. Jalen took a quiet breath. He had spent years watching trials, studying prosecutors, their tricks, the way they played the system. And there was one thing he knew without a doubt. If Carrington felt sure about his case, he wouldn't be stalling. Grayson sighed, rubbing his temple. Counselor Carrington finally shook his head. No objections, Your Honor. But the change had already started. For the first time, the courtroom wasn't laughing anymore. The courtroom was silent, but the tension was loud. Carrington shuffled his papers, his polished confidence breaking around the edges. Your Honor, while we wait for the GPS records, the fact remains that the defendant's fingerprints were found on the steering wheel of the stolen car. Jalen gave a small nod, his face unreadable. That's true. He took a step forward. But let's talk about that evidence for a second. Grayson raised an eyebrow, waving for him to continue. Jalen turned to the jury, making eye contact with each one of them. The prosecution wants you to believe that finding my fingerprints in a car means I stole it. That's the story they're selling. But let's think about this with common sense. He took a deep breath, his tone staying calm, controlled. Let's say you walk into a department store and try on a jacket. You put your hands in the pockets, maybe zip it up, then put it back on the rack and walk out a few hours later. Someone steals that jacket. Would the fact that your fingerprints are on it mean you stole it? A few jurors looked at each other. Someone in the crowd muttered something under their breath. Jalen didn't give them time to recover. The car in question was parked outside a 7-Eleven hours before the theft they claim happened. I was inside that store with 3 friends, and yes, when we walked past the car, I leaned against it. I even opened the door because it was already unlocked. I didn't think much of it, didn't take the car, didn't drive it, didn't steal anything from inside, just a dumb moment of curiosity. He let that sit for a second, then, in a voice that cut through the silence like a knife, he asked, does touching something make you a criminal? Carrington cleared his throat, flipping through his notes, searching for something. Anything to take back control. Jalen wasn't finished. And while we're on the topic, let's talk about how that fingerprint test was done. He turned to Grayson. Your Honor, was the fingerprint expert from this case called to testify? Grayson blinked, caught off guard by the question. He glanced at Carrington. The prosecutor hesitated, then reluctantly said, no. Jalen's lips pressed together. So let me get this straight. The state is using fingerprint evidence to try and convict me, but they didn't think it was necessary to bring in the actual expert who checked that evidence. No chance for me to ask questions, ask about how the evidence was handled, or challenge if the test was accurate. Carrington's jaw tightened. Jalen nodded like that was all he needed to hear. Interesting. Judge Grayson sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. It was the look of a man realizing this case was not the easy win he had thought it would be. But Jalen wasn't done yet, because the next thing he was about to say it would change everything. Jalen took a slow step forward, his voice steady but firm. Your Honor, I'd like to enter into evidence an official statement from the owner of the car. Judge Grayson frowned. The owner? Jalen nodded. Yes, Mr. Raymond Whitaker, the registered owner of the stolen Audi, gave a statement to the police that for some reason was never turned in with the prosecution's papers, and I think I know why. He turned to Carrington. Do you remember what Mr. Whitaker told officers the night his car was reported stolen? Carrington's jaw clenched. He knew exactly what was coming. Jalen didn't wait for him to answer. Instead, he pulled out a printed paper from his file and read aloud. I left my car running when I ran inside the gas station. Some kid must have jumped in and taken off. But it wasn't the guy you arrested. I saw the kid, and he was white. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Jalen held the paper up. That's from the original police report. The same report the prosecution conveniently never mentioned. He turned back to Judge Grayson. The arresting officer admitted this from his testimony. The prosecution ignored it, and yet they want this jury to believe that I, someone who doesn't even match the description of the real thief, was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Carrington stepped forward. Scrambling, Your Honor. This is irrelevant. The defendant was caught in possession of the vehicle, but Jalen shook his head. No, I wasn't. His voice didn't rise, but it cut through the courtroom with sharp precision. I was arrested blocks away from where the car was left walking. Home after getting snacks with my friends. I wasn't in the car. I wasn't near the car. I wasn't running from anything. The only thing connecting me to this case is bad police work and assumptions. Judge Grayson let out a slow breath, rubbing his temple. The case was falling apart fast, and everyone knew it. Jalen turned back to the jury. The real suspect got away that night. The officers found a black kid in the same general area and decided that was close enough. That's what this case is really about, silence. Grayson cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. Does the prosecution have anything further? Carrington was stiff, his face red. No. Your Honor. Judge Grayson breathed out. He looked at Jalen for a long time, then glanced at the jury. Finally, he leaned forward and spoke the words that would stay with everyone in that room. Case dismissed. A beat of stunned silence, then chaos. Half the courtroom erupted, some in disbelief, some in quiet relief. The crowd stirred, reporters writing in their notebooks. Jalen didn't move right away. He let the moment settle, let the reality sink in for everyone. Judge Grayson, still holding his gavel, looked at Jalen with an unreadable expression. There was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, recognition, maybe even regret. Jalen met his gaze, then turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, the judge spoke again. Mr. Dawson. Jalen stopped but didn't turn. Grayson hesitated, then finally said, "You should consider law school." Jalen smiled. He didn't need to consider it. He was already on his way outside the courthouse. The air was thick with voices. Reporters crowded the steps, their cameras flashing, microphones pushed forward like weapons. Jalen, did you know the judge would dismiss the case? What are you going to do next? How does it feel to outmaneuver a seasoned prosecutor? Jalen pulled his hoodie over his head, ignoring the questions. He wasn't interested in the show. This wasn't about proving how smart he was. It was about something bigger. His mother, Denise, was waiting for him at the bottom of the steps. Her arms were crossed, her face unreadable for a long moment. She just looked at him. Then finally she shook her head and let out a breath. "Boy, you scared me half to death." Jalen chuckled, scratching the back of his head. Had to take a risk. Marshy stared at him a second longer, then pulled him into a tight hug. "You always were the stubborn one." The cameras kept flashing, but Jalen wasn't paying attention to them anymore. Across the street, standing by his car, Judge Grayson watched. His posture was different now. The arrogance was gone. His expression wasn't amused anymore. It was something else, something closer to thinking deeply. He hadn't expected this case to be anything more than routine, just another day, another defendant, another guilty plea. But now he knew he'd remember this one, because Jalen had done something most people never could. He made the system look at itself, and for once, it blinked first. Here's the lesson we should learn. How many other cases had gone this way? How many people had been convicted not because of evidence, but because of unfair treatment, shortcuts, and a system that cared more about closing cases than finding the truth? Jalen had the knowledge to fight back, but what about the ones who didn't? This wasn't just about one case, it was about all of them. He knew what he had to do next. This courtroom wouldn't be the last one he stood in, but next time, he wouldn't be the defendant, he'd be the attorney. And when that day came, he wouldn't be the only one. If this story made you think, even for a second, then share it. The justice system is built on laws, but it's run by people. And people can change, but only if we make them. Hit that like button, subscribe for more stories that matter. And let's keep the conversation going. Because next time, it might not be Jalen, it might be someone you know,